Historically, in Western culture, witchcraft was condemned and outlawed as an unspeakably evil act against God because it defied religious orders set by the Old Testament. For example, Leviticus 20:27 states that a man or woman who is a medium or necromancer shall surely be put to death. They shall be stoned with stones, their blood shall be upon them. Until the emergence of the philosophical Age of Enlightenment, which sought for reason over divinity, religion dominated almost all ways of thinking. Christianity had an overwhelming influence on people's way of life, and individuals lived under the brooding assumption that everything they did was being judged and scrutinized by God. This is something that Robert Eggers, the writer and director of The Witch, attempts to convey. Fundamentally, The Witch is a period drama that should not be misconceived as a traditional modern horror. The Witch embeds a very unorthodox and cryptic series of themes surrounding the paranoia or horror of religion in 17th century New England. In that time, the first accusations of witchcraft had just emerged, with husband and wife Hugh and Mary Parsons accusing each other of committing the evil act, and this inevitably sparked a series of allegations throughout the century. For example, you may have heard of the Salem witch trials. These were a series of prosecutions again in 17th century Massachusetts where over 150 men and women were accused of witchcraft. The event itself was pretty conventional given that witch hunting had become a very ordinary way of life. But many historians today view it as an example of religious fundamentalism leading to paranoia and mass hysteria. The point was that it was not witchcraft that was important, but how religion and belief systems held a very powerful control on society. And this idea is maintained throughout the entire film. The film is very blunt with the impact that religion has on its characters, and the use of imagery helps to convey an even deeper subtext to the overall story. Firstly, the family are from a Puritan Christian background. Puritans were a group of Reformed Protestants who immigrated from England following legal restrictions to worship by the state, in an attempt to purify their religion back to its ideal form. They had very censorious moral beliefs in the likes of self-indulgence and sex, which are in fact two distinct themes that present themselves very prominently throughout the film. In the eyes of Puritans, God was in control of every aspect of their life, so they lived under the faith that God will either save them from their sins or damn them to hell for their selfish desires. These were beliefs that stemmed from the Old Testament, which incidentally also scorned the use of witchcraft. In the book of Genesis, giving into temptation and creating sin that would taint the Holy Land is heavily implied throughout the film. In the opening scene, the family are exiled from their community and banished into the empty wilderness because of religious reasons. It mirrors the trials and tribulations of Adam and Eve, who were also banished from their holy place because of their sins as well. Right away, we establish the film's central metaphor. The plantation was their Garden of Eden, which they tainted with their sins and now must face trial and punishment from God. What's apparent is that every character is guilty of sin, especially the father who brings about the downfall of the family because of his own selfish ways. The reason the family are exiled is because the father William is excommunicated for his prideful conceit. Excommunication involves the suspension of membership to a religious community, as well as restricted rights to the likes of receiving sacraments. In the case of the father, it's quite a humiliating punishment as he's effectively banished from his religion as a sinner of God, who must now beg for forgiveness alone. Prideful conceit, as they call it, refers to taking pride in one's own vanity and possessions, which goes against the word of God because it's seen as worshipping false idols, as the Old Testament suggests. The daughter Thomason later calls the father out to be a hypocrite because he goes against his own Puritan beliefs of rejecting self-indulgence. The image of him praying to God while looking very much like our depiction of Jesus goes as far as to perpetuate his sinful pride and vanity, even further as if he himself has become his own false idol. He even admits to this, hence why he drops the axe and refuses to kill the goat in the climax of the film. By killing the goat, it only further reinforces his prideful conceit. He knows very well that it's his punishment for his sins, and thus submits to his fate chosen by God, which unknowingly to him turns out to be the work of the devil, something that I will of course come back to. The son Caleb is the other sinner of the family who is guilty of lust. As Exodus 20:17 states, do not commit adultery. As blatant as it is, this is later echoed by Matthew 5:28, which states, but I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. The film's constant POV of Thomason's breasts reflects Caleb's inner lust, which is called upon when he is confronted by a witch much later in the narrative. With Caleb, Adam and Eve becomes especially prominent with the apple tree he keeps referring to. Before his death, he chokes up a red apple, symbolizing the forbidden fruit that saw Adam and Eve break God's command, which in that context was a metaphor for indulgence and pleasure in illegal or immoral acts, such as his incestuous desires for his sister. Both the father and the son give in to selfish temptations which sinfully taint their Puritan beliefs further than before they were exiled. As a result, they both submit to their fates in their final prayers for forgiveness shortly before their deaths. But notice how both the father and son are given very profound similarities in their personal ordeals. In Puritan households, the male members played a vital role to the family, as biblical teaching stated that the father was to maintain the dominant authority figure, and females were to play a more submissive role in child-rearing. The hunting scene with both the father and son sets up the father's intentions of rearing his son into an authority figure, so suitably passing on the breadwinner ideal. The father's masculinity is even called into question on several occasions. The constant motif of him chopping wood infers to his responsibility as the man of the house, and of course he is eventually buried under his own masculine pride, that is, the wood itself. But his perceived failures as a man are evident considering he lacks the ability to hunt and gather for his family, again furthering his delusions of vanity despite being bad at most things. If you were to bring witchcraft back into the equation, for Thomason to become a witch, they must first get rid of all male dominance so that she can be free. There is of course the baby boy, who also represents another male figure. However, as the concerned mother Catherine highlights, their baby Samuel was never baptized before going missing. This is the fault of the father, who after being excommunicated means that the baby couldn't receive any sacraments, ultimately dooming the baby to a life of sin. As the Bible suggests, all babies are born with sin, hence why the witch found effective use for the baby. In Puritan belief, girls carried the burden of Eve's corruption, and were given a separate religious education from boys, hence the family's continued parallels with Adam and Eve. In the case of Thomason, the mother and father discuss how she is approaching puberty, and so they plan to sell her to another family. This was not uncommon amongst Puritans. They believed that separating their child from their mother in adolescence would bring the child closer to God. This becomes Thomason's final act before transforming into a witch, where she kills her mother and thus severs her ties from her family to allow her to grow closer to God. Again, however, this is actually the work of the devil. Thomason's transformation into a witch is completely justifiable given how she is tricked into accepting her fate. The goat known as Black Phillip is of course revealed to be Satan, and has been since the beginning of the film. In the Garden of Eden, Satan was disguised as a snake who tricks Eve into biting the forbidden apple, and eventually tempting Adam to do the same. Many people may assume that it's the witch that's influencing the family, causing the crops to die and making the animals act weird. In reality, it isn't. It's actually the work of Black Phillip, who is in fact the real antagonist of the film. Thomason attempts to hold dearly to her beliefs, but eventually gives in to temptation when no other option of hope is available. Her parents are prepared to sell her off when she hits puberty, and eventually the entire family seem to conspire against her. She is the last person to see the baby, the twins, and even the son before they go missing, placing her as the suspect to their disappearance. Thomason also jokingly calls herself a witch to scare off her sister, but this eventually leads to false delusions that she is actually a witch. What occurs is a self-fulfilling prophecy. The family outcasts her as a possible witch, and after so much time being caught up in the drama, she accepts her label and becomes what others think that she is. This is further heightened by Thomason inadvertently bathing in her mother's blood, and of course she submits herself to Satan, the last and only male figure in the story. In Christian belief, making a deal with the devil involves giving her soul in exchange for things against the Puritan belief, which in this case is witchcraft. The scene also serves as her selling her adolescence to the devil, as the witches become her new family. When she is asked to strip, nudity is once again highlighted. In Genesis, Adam and Eve were unclothed, but it was only when they sinned did they realize that they were naked. As Genesis 3:7 states, "Then the eyes of both were opened, and they knew that they were naked." In verse 10, God makes them garments of skin, implying that it was a metaphor for covering their sins in the now fallen world. When Adam gave in to temptation, God put a curse on the land and banished them, much like the ordeal that the family has gone through. From that point in the Bible, nakedness became a sin, showing that the witches embrace sinful desires, hence why they're constantly nude. Even when the son returns himself, he is also found naked. And then, of course, the naked, unbaptized baby can be used to make a flying ointment that allows the witches to fly to the Sabbath on their brooms. And this is repeated again as the witches dance around the fire, implying that perhaps they were performing the same ritual with the twins. In conclusion, the witch plays on the family's mindset of religion. On the one hand, they pray for thanks and forgiveness, yet when their prayers go unanswered, it poses the notion as to whether there is no God or if God has simply abandoned them. The devil is ultimately in command of the family now that they have been excommunicated from their holy land. Despite what goodness is in their souls, the family are banished to a sinful wilderness where they are torn apart by an evil force that God ultimately has no control of. Guys, as always, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please let me know what you thought in the comments below. And if you want to ask me anything directly or send a request my way, you can do so through my Facebook and Twitter. Please go like and follow me there, because I am on those platforms as much as I can be. And if you want to, and only if you can do so, of course, you can also pledge directly to the channel. That's completely up to you if you're in a position in which you can do so. Next week, we will be doing a video essay on Little Miss Sunshine. However, I do want you guys to send me requests, okay? I want to see what you guys want me to talk about next. Until next time, stay safe, and I'll see you all very, very soon.